Good morning, children, and welcome to the very last installment of the Lighthouse Keeper's Catastrophe story. Yesterday, we left off the story at a rather intriguing part, didn't we? Just as Mrs. Grinling had a perfectly brilliant idea, and you children had lovely suggestions about what might that perfectly brilliant idea be. Now, children, we are going to find out what it was that Mrs. Grinling actually had in mind. And there she is, gathering all sorts of things around the house. While Mr. Grinling looked on, Mrs. Grinling rushed about the little white cottage, gathering up all manner of things. She put everything she had collected into a large sack. She weighed the sack, and then she weighed Mr. Grinling. Mr. Grinling began to feel nervous, but he wasn't quite sure why. By the time Mrs. Grinling had attached the sack to the pulley and sent it down the wire, Mr. Grinling was biting his fingernails and muttering to himself. Poor Mr. Grinling. And there is Hamish looking on. Mrs. Grinling smiled happily. "That worked perfectly," she said. "Your turn now." Mr. Grinling's legs became quite wobbly, and he had to sit down quickly in the chair. "Me?" he squeaked. "On that wire, all the way to the lighthouse? You know I am terrified of thunder and lightning, Mrs. Grinling. How could you suggest such an idea on a night like this?" Mrs. Grinling spoke to him in a stern voice. "You must be brave, Mr. Grinling. Think of your poor little Hamish all alone in the dark. Think of all the ships that might be lost because your light isn't shining." Mr. Grinling shuddered. "Of course you are quite right, Mrs. Grinling. I must be brave. I am the lighthouse keeper, and come rain or shine, I must tend that light." Can you see what's Mrs. Grinling doing behind her back? Without further ado, Mr. Grinling climbed into his wet weather gear, fastened the harness around himself, and attached it to the pulley. A quick glance back at his comfortable armchair, a big kiss of luck from Mrs. Grinling, and out he swung into the dark, wet night. Mrs. Grinling watched until Mr. Grinling became a tiny speck in the darkness. The minutes ticked by, and nothing happened. Mrs. Grinling became quite agitated. Why was it taking so long? Had something happened to Mr. Grinling? At last she was able to uncross her fingers and smile again. Her plan had worked. Mr. Grinling and Hamish were safe, for there it was for all the ships to see, the light shining steadily and bravely across the ocean. What a lovely story, children. Do you agree? Now, children, today, for the last time this week, we have again 2 sets of tasks to do based on how difficult they are. The easier task is the comprehension task, and you have 7 questions today. And again, we are going to be trying to use our conjunctions that and because in our answers. Not all of the answers do require the use of conjunction that and because, but all of the answers do need to be written in full sentences with capital letters and full stops. So what are today's questions? Question number 1. What might have Mr. Grinling been thinking when Mrs. Grinling weighed him? Number 2. Which words give us a clue that Mr. Grinling was feeling nervous when Mrs. Grinling attached the sack to the pulley? Number 3. Why were Mr. Grinling's legs wobbly? Number 4. Find the verb in the text which means shivered. Number 5. Why did Mrs. Grinling become agitated? Number 6. How did Mrs. Grinling know that Mr. Grinling was at the lighthouse? And number 7, which 2 adverbs describe how the light was shining across the ocean? The harder task today is to finish recounting this last part of the story so that you would have recounted the whole story of the Lighthouse Keeper's catastrophe in your words. And remember, yet again, we are focusing on the use of subordinating conjunctions because, when, that and if in our own writing. And of course we do need to remember all the correct punctuations, and there will be extra rewards for any exciting adjectives, powerful verbs or adverbs, and of course different types of sentences. Children, you are such good writers, children. I don't think I really need to remind you of what makes a really, really good piece of writing anymore. I'm really looking forward to receiving all of your work today. Bye for now.